How do you keep your logistics supervisors engaged after training? I'm Greg Schenkel, President of Unique Training and Development and Frontline Leadership Systems, and today we need to talk about the fact that many companies view training more as an event and not as much as a process. Now, the myth that we're trying to bust here is that logistics supervisors just won't stay engaged with training after it's delivered, and it's impossible to change these habits because they're so deeply ingrained. Now, one thing I can agree with is that habits are very difficult for people to change because you've incorporated them over time. So when I ask you to act differently, it's not going to feel good the first time you do it until it becomes more automatic. So according to ResearchGate, logistics supervisors who underwent leadership training, participated in it, improved their learning capacity by 25% and their performance by 20% while remaining engaged. So the facts say that people actually do appreciate training and put it to good use. One client had this very familiar refrain. Managers were complaining that they'd done training before, it didn't really stick, people didn't put it into action. And then one of the executives spoke up and said at the previous company he worked for, they actually took it in a very different way. He said they actually viewed leadership development as a multi-year process because they recognized the one thing that is absolutely true, and that is that reinforcement over time helps people remember and integrate these new behaviors into their routines. So we actually put together a multi-year training program for the organization, and instead of viewing it as one course, it became a 3-level program that everyone went through over a period of time. And even after the 3-year process, they were looking at how to do refresher sessions so that they could keep that spirit of learning and growing alive. So I've got a few tips for how to keep your logistics supervisors engaged after training. Tip number 1 is to think long-term. Many companies, when they look at doing frontline leadership training, it's because of something that's happened recently. It could be maybe the results of an employee survey that weren't as good as they wanted, or maybe turnover is a little bit high, or maybe there's been a complaint to HR, or there's just too many issues that are getting escalated to management and HR that should really be resolved by the supervisors. But when you think long-term, remember that people can't learn everything in a 2-day class. Imagine if our education system was like, you come in for a year and then you're good. Right? No, you come back year after year and you build on the skills that you had. So with that kind of reinforcement, in fact, think of your own development and you'll realize that sometimes the first time you hear or learn something is not what makes it stick. Maybe it's the second or third time that you hear it in a slightly different way that causes you to integrate it into your behaviors. Tip number 2 is to reinforce the learning. Many managers will still send their people to training. It still surprises us to know that some people that show up for training were just told the day before that you're going to a class, even though we'd planned it weeks in advance. So having a discussion between the manager and the supervisor and the frontline leader who's coming to the course ahead of time can really make a big difference. Because if you and I review the course outline together and I say, hey, the reason I'm glad you're taking the course is I really would like you to see you focus on these areas, then I'm going to go to the course as the participant and take more interest in it, knowing that my manager has actually told me why I'm going to the training and what do they hope to see come out of it. So reinforcing the learning through those discussions before the training and then after the training, having a touch base that says, what are you putting into action? How is that going? If you've been struggling with something, how do we reinforce it so it stays alive? And tip number 3 is to lead by example. Many supervisors will point out that their managers really should have gone through the training. And what they're really saying in that comment is that what we're teaching them in the class, they're not seeing demonstrated by their management team. And some management teams say, hey, we're different, we've taken these courses before, the supervisors just need to be fixed and get better at things. But think about the power that comes when I, as the manager, lead in a way that's consistent with what my supervisors are being trained. It becomes nothing that a supervisor has to compare and say, well, my boss is saying this or doing this, and I'm being taught to do this. What should I do? We want to have that nice consistency that reinforces the learning and makes it very consistent. Now, once you've figured out how to keep your logistics supervisors engaged after training, you're going to realize that they probably need some additional development to become exceptional leaders. That's where our Frontline Leadership Program comes into. Now, we have our standard 3 days of content, but we actually have twice that amount available. So if you've been there and done that, it's time to maybe look at some of the other topics or finding a refreshing way to go back to the fundamentals with your team. All of that, of course, happens with a conversation, and you can connect with us on our website at uniquedevelopment.com, and then we can talk about what is the solution that will help your leaders in the short term, but actually sustain it in the long term, so you see the behavior changes that will drive organizational excellence.